we're using the orientation of this to give us, as you can see, this orientation here. We're using tetras, we're using material dynamic, which is phosphors. We're using drag. This is just to slow these sparks down as they travel outwards, these phosphors. And we delete them after 120 frames plus and minus 40 frames. That's just to obviously get rid of them. As they're traveling, they're spawning particles, so we're creating a particle trail. And you can see those are sent down here. We're setting the trails to be random. We're using material dynamic phosphors, and we're deleting these after 8 and plus or minus 6 frames. So we have quite a random variation there. So if we go to a camera viewpoint, and I'll just shut down this view and press play. So there you go. You can see we've got this ring wave of phosphors firing outwards. This is actually quite subtle in the final comp, but it could have been boosted much more, and we could have had a lot more sort of effects going on here. But in the end, I just decided this was the right sort of level of these sort of sparks that I wanted. So you can see you can actually create quite a strong sort of ring wave effect just using particles. And this is again quite similar to the sort of firework effect that we saw earlier on in this DVD. I'll just bring a particle view again and go over here. I'll just turn off the ring wave. Then we've got the ball wave, and it's basically the same kind of thing. I'll just turn this off. There we go. Obviously this starts on frame 50, so let's press play here. And as you can see now, it's more of a sort of ball shape. They're just sent out. And that's just using speed here, which is random 3D. So we're not basing the speed anymore on the icon orientation. We're just basing it on a random 3D direction. So we get this ball of particles being fired outwards. Obviously, we're using less. Here we're using just 200. And we're doing basically the same thing again. We're assigning all these materials, setting up the shapes, applying a dynamic material. We're then spawning by travel. We've got a step size of 7 here, and let's have a look down here what we've got. We've got a step size here of 4. Now, that's just basically because I felt that it didn't need quite as much of a trail being left behind it. It didn't need to be quite as coherent. And then these spawn particles are sent off, and then they're using this phosphor material. So if we just go in here and have a look at this phosphor material, as I described earlier, it's got a kind of sparkling effect to it. And this is something I noticed in the original effect in Star Wars, the film. The particles, as they flew outwards, they sort of twinkled and sparkled and shimmered. And I thought that would be a nice sort of look to try and keep in the effect. So that's it, really. We spawn out 2 missiles. They fly outwards towards our spaceship. They strike our spaceship, not in this case using a collision, but just using an absolute time test. And when they strike, we stop emitting our particle trails for the missiles. We get rid of our missile geometry, that's not needed anymore. And then we have this spawning going on here. And then we use split amount to actually send on our particles to these new events. And we create these various effects. We create a ring wave. We create a ring wave, we create a ball wave. We have ring wave phosphors. We have the ring wave here, we have the ring wave phosphors, which is the particle effect, and we have the ball wave phosphors. So we have these different effects all created from just 2 particles, which are emitted at the beginning of this effect. So you can see just by emitting 2 particles and splitting and spawning that you can create a large amount of effects going on here. And if we used collision rather than an absolute time frame, we could make this completely procedural, so that when our missiles homed in and actually struck our spaceship, they would actually cause this explosion. And we're using find target, but we could also change that to be more random, have a much wider random value. And if we increased the range on which our find target test was based, we could actually even have missiles miss. And after a certain amount of time, let's say if a missile doesn't strike a target, we could have the missile explode. You know, let's say it's got a self-destruct mechanism to stop it, you know, floating through space dangerously, you know. A lot of weapons will have that these days. If they don't strike a target, you don't want the weapon lying around, you know, being dangerous. So the weapon will automatically destruct if it doesn't reach its target. So you could have that with the missiles, auto self-destruct if they've flown for a certain amount of time. When they strike a target using collisions, you can have them explode. You can have them explode when they find their target, when they get within a certain range of it. You know, a lot of missiles don't actually strike a target and then explode. They just get within a certain range of the target and then explode. And that's used especially in, I think it's tank missiles. They explode before they actually hit the tank, and then, you know, inject this superheated gas to sort of melt its way through the target's armor. So that's another thing that you could do. You could actually anticipate collision with the target object and have the particle, the missile I should say, explode before it reaches its target. So there's lots and lots of different things you can do with this. Very, very procedural. It's a fantastic thing about particle flow is you can build up all these decision-making events and have things happen based on those decision-making events. It's great fun to work with. You know, as you've seen in this DVD, you can do some fantastic events with it. Sorry, some fantastic effects with it. And let's actually move on now onto the last chapter in this DVD, where we actually look at the most complex effect so far. It's got a pretty much the most complex flow that we've seen to date, but don't get intimidated by it. It's, at the end of the day, it's all relatively simple. Okay, so let's move on now and have a look at the Ogre in the Rain effect.